Hello and welcome to another edition of Critical Q&A, the show where I answer your questions based on what you've left for me in the comment section of my Q&A videos or have sent to me by email at askchrisshelton@gmail.com. I wanted to quickly plug again my new Sensibly Speaking Podcast 2.0. Okay, new format. If you haven't checked it out, new direction. It is just me, of course, now, with guests. I've had some really awesome guests. In fact, this last week, Rachel Bernstein was sort of in studio with me, and we talked about toxic relationships and the relationship between, like narcissists, sociopaths, this sort of thing, in relationships, and it has a lot to do with destructive cults and that sort of thing. And that same mentality. It's just that it happens to be two people instead of a large group. So if you're at all interested in that sort of thing, go ahead and check out that podcast. I think you'll find it quite interesting. I've been getting some very nice comments on it since it went up yesterday. So now we've got some pretty interesting questions this week. Let's get to them. Jonathan Mark. LRH died in 1986, before paperless offices were practical. Did LRH require orgs to maintain their records on paper in central files because decades ago he couldn't conceive of a large organization maintaining notes and records electronically? Have any orgs gone paperless? Would LRH's admin tech even permit an org to go paperless? Well, as a matter of fact, Hubbard was writing policies about computers because, of course, computers were invented in the the digital recording media and that sort of thing came about in the 70s and 80s. And Hubbard, of course, was alive then, right? And so they weren't just, using punch cards and that sort of thing. They actually had digital tape and even, disk drives and that sort of thing by the time he died. And he did conceive of using computers to speed up and make orgs more efficient. And there were things called routing forms where these were pieces of paper, and this had been invented long before the 80s, where Hubbard basically laid out on a piece of paper different routes or different things that a person would need to do in an organization to go from one person to the next in order to accomplish some purpose. Like, for example, let's say a person is going to start a course. Well, they start a routing form that says, here's the to start a course routing form. And it starts with the registrar, the salesperson who's going to sign the person up, get his money. Then the routing form has the steps that the salesperson would take with the person. Meet him, sign him up for his course, get his money, this sort of thing, make sure he's bought his materials. And the staff member signs the routing form at each step to show that all the steps have been done according to Hubbard's policies. Then the person goes to the next person on the routing form, which would, let's say, be the course administrator, who would receive the person, sign him up in a log book saying that the person had started his course, verify that he paid for it with the invoice. That's all gets noted on the routing form. Then the next step is the person goes and sees the course supervisor, who introduces him to the class, walks him around the course room, makes sure he knows where everything is, sits him down, and gets him started on the course. Now, it sounds like a lot of rigmarole, but it's actually all the steps necessary to make sure that the person is paid for the course and goes in and starts the course and is oriented and knows what to do. It's actually not a bad idea. I don't know if Hubbard came up with routing forms himself or if it was somebody else's idea, but it's not a bad idea, really. When computers came along, Hubbard had the idea of computerizing all of that so that, a central management function or unit outside of the organization would be able to see that all of these steps had been done on each person and be able to track all of this. And the idea with the computers was there'd be a central computer bank where all of this information would be stored. And the routing forms were made computerized, where they could be basically scanned into a computer, right? Now, this was all like super, super high tech in the early 1980s when Hubbard was conceiving of this. And of course now, we scan things and there's OCR and there's all sorts of things, and it would be pretty easy to do. But still, churches have not really, the routing forms were, it never caught on really in terms of the whole computerized thing because there was so much paperwork. It became so bureaucratic because, every single person starting a course, finishing a course, everything you could do in an organization, signing up for staff, leaving staff, all the different things, staff members going on courses, going into auditing. I mean, just all the stuff had different routing forms. So after a while, you just had stacks and stacks of paper, and people were really sick of this stuff. Plus, there were also weekly reports that all the staff were expected to do, and they were supposed to fill these out on these computerized forms. Then later, they started filling them out on computer documents, right? Text documents that were created for the staff, and they were supposed to fill all this stuff out. But staff hated it, and they didn't really have a lot of time to be doing this stuff, or at least they didn't think they did. And so they just started filling them out. Every week it was just copy paste from last week, and then this information would go up to management. Now, the staff didn't really have a lot of time or effort put into doing this stuff. Well, they're just ignored by management, right? I mean, most management staff don't pay attention to any of this stuff. And the whole Hubbard idea of all of this stuff sort of being collected up at a central location, and then like some kind of artificial intelligence, being able to analyze all this stuff, that has not particularly been well conceived of by the Church of Scientology's computer unit, which is called INCOM, the International Network of Computer-Oriented or Organized Management. INCOM, right? This is the central computer organization that exists way up at the top of the hierarchy of Scientology organizations, and there's like a handful of people in it, and they're not up to programming this stuff, so that there's like some computerized management thing going on with Scientology. So that's kind of the scene there. But I talk about all of this because it's part of what LRH conceived of for organizations, and it was actually not such a bad idea, really. But it was pretty impractical in the way it was rolled out. Starting in the 1980s, they had great big ideas, and those ideas were never really followed through on to full conception. And now, management, as I've described before, is in such a, constant state of emergency, hubbub, flap, 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 flap all the time, that they don't look at any of this computerized stuff that comes up to them, or use it efficiently at all, because they're always in emergency, frantic hysteria mode to make money. And so all of this stuff that I just described was really just sort of wasted effort. And again, it kind of goes back to David Miscavige, because he doesn't run, he's one, he doesn't run things well, and two, he disassembled all of management at the highest levels. So there are no international executives up there directing things to put all of this order in, and that's the main reason why Scientology is such a disaster, as I've laid out in my Scientology Organizational Madness video. And if you haven't watched that, check it out, because that will explain to you the whole structure of management and why it's such a disaster under David Miscavige. So as far as going paperless goes, one last thing I'll mention on this is when I was in management, I've told the story before that an RTC guy came in. We had computerized graphs of all of the statistics for all the organizations. And I told the story about how he came in and looked at that and was like, no, Hubbard said it had to be on graph paper and it was supposed to be plotted. And so we had to go print all these graphs. Well, we had them paperless. They had actually achieved a paperless statistical system of management for us to go through all the graphs and everything every week for all the different organizations. And there were a lot of statistics and a lot of stuff kept on that, and it actually could have been a fairly efficient management setup until this RTC guy came in and was like, Hubbard said it was supposed to be on graph paper. And so we had to print all this stuff. So not only were we not paperless, we were wasting paper by the ream. I mean, just boxes and boxes of paper used every week, printing all these graphs for all of the management units. And then the next week having to do it all over again, and then all over again. And I mean, it was ridiculous how much paper we went through that we didn't even need to go through, simply because of stupid ideas that get floated around. And I'm pretty sure that Scientology is not unique in, or doesn't have any exclusive rights to stupid ideas in bureaucracies. and corporate situations or organizations. Because I've, there are stupid people in all of these organizations around the world that just conceive of the dumbest ideas. And I don't know any organization that's really gone totally paperless. Maybe there's some out there, you guys can tell me, but certainly not the Church of Scientology. They waste paper by the palletful. So there you go. Stephen Willis, during your time in Scientology, did you ever see anybody who was specifically targeted for an expectation of future windfall? For example, did anybody who looked like they might be in line to inherit money ever receive any special treatment from the church, or were these people just expected to take the regular routes like everybody else until their net worth was bolstered? Oh, no. If somebody had money coming, they were definitely wined and dined. And generally, how it was pushed, the sales guys, the registrars, okay, we'll just call them regs because that's what Scientology calls them, the regs, would just gangbang on these people, right? Like, let's say you had a parishioner in Kansas City and his dad died or was was on his deathbed or something, and it was expected that this guy was gonna get an inheritance of $100,000 or something. Well, the regs at Kansas City would be all over that guy. They'd be at his house talking to him about his future bridge progress and that of his family, if he had any family, sons, daughters, whatever, right? And they'd be pushing him hard to secure his bridge. You got to secure your bridge, man. You got to put the postulate there, because if you put the money there, then that puts the bridge there, and then you're really going to do it, right? And you got to put the whole bridge there, not just a little chunk or not just your next steps. Let's do the whole thing, right? In other words, let's get all of that $100,000 or as much of it as we can convince this guy to give us. Now, if the guy didn't have the money to hand, right? And this would be anything from $5,000, $10,000, $100,000, $1 million, whatever it was. Then the idea would be, we'll put it on your credit cards. We'll extend your credit. We'll call the credit card company and get them to bump up your limit, right? Or let's get you an American Express, right? No limit on that, right? Or whatever. Or is there somebody you know who you can borrow the money from, and then when you get the inheritance, you can pay him back, because we need the money now. It was always now, right? When those regs got dollar signs in their eyes, it was like ding, 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 and let's do it. Let's get it. Let's make this happen. And they become the worst used car salesman you could possibly imagine, right? Just all over this guy. And they, of course, while they're doing that, they'll take him to dinner. They'll take him, they're not going to take him out to movies or anything like that, but they'll take him to nice places and really just work him, right? If it calls for that sort of thing. But generally speaking, the regs just want to sit the guy down and get him to pay now. And that's how that sort of thing would work. There wasn't anything, in terms of special treatment, there might be special treatment in terms of if the person was not able to get auditing, okay, an illegal PC. There's policies in the church, and they've since been loosened up quite a bit because, the church is desperate for people. But there used to be policies in place that were pretty strict about if you had a history of psychiatric treatment or drugs, like psychiatric drugging, right? You were on Zoloft for 10 years or Ritalin or something like that, and there were a lot of people that applied to. Then you'd be labeled an illegal PC, an illegal pre-clear, and you could not get auditing in Scientology. A pre-clear is somebody who gets auditing. So you were illegal, right? And orgs couldn't audit you. And so therefore, of course, they couldn't take your money for auditing because they couldn't sell it to you because they couldn't deliver it to you. However, you could petition to be accepted for auditing under certain circumstances. And if you had a lot of money coming, that might be one of those special circumstances. Now, of course, they would never say it that way or admit to that. But, if some guy was coming into a lot of money, well, in the Church of Scientology, it's all about money. And money talks, right? So if a guy had a big inheritance coming, the chances of his petition being approved would be exponentially raised depending on how much money he was going to cough up, right? And so that might be an example of a special circumstance somebody like that might get that your run-of-the-mill Scientologist wouldn't normally get. So I'm sure you can imagine how other circumstances like that might also happen because of the money. Kiwi Forever. A quick question that you may have answered before. In your time at the Church of Scientology, did you ever get to meet David Miscavige? If so, what were your impressions of him as a man, a leader, and as a human being in general? How did he treat Sea Org members in person? I'd be interested to get the same feedback on LRH, but I think that may be before your time. Yeah, I met David Miscavige twice, and the first time was at Flag in Clearwater in 1996, where he did a briefing. I was in a room with him. He was briefing all of us for about 3 days straight, all day on this new release called The Golden Age of Tech that was happening in 1996. And he was intense. He was scary. I got the impression of him as being a very hard-nosed person who was not to be trifled with. He wanted things his way, and there was no question that he was going to get that because he had other people around in the room who were making sure of it, right? This is back when Marty Rathbun was in RTC under Miscavige. In fact, he was there too. It's the first time I met him. And other people from RTC were there to make sure that what he wanted done in that briefing was done. We were being briefed by him, but then there were drills and exercises and things that we were doing, and they were overseeing that. Then the next time that I saw him was very, very briefly back in Los Angeles. He was doing a quick inspection and tour of the CLO, the Continental Liaison Office building, which is management for Western United States, which is where I worked at the time. And he came around and he just poked his head in and he said, "What's your post?" And I told him what my post was. And of course I stood up, "Hello, sir," and he's like, "Okay, good. And are you, did you get trained for your post, for your job, right?" And I was like, "Yes, sir," and then he asked me a couple other questions, which I won't get into because they're just very technical questions. And then he turned around and left. I mean, it was like bam, bam. And it was, and if he was his usual intense self, he was kind of a little friendly at that particular time, much friendlier than he had been back in '96. But what was noteworthy was how after he left, like 3 or 4 people hit me, came up after him, who were not with him at the moment, but they came up like just a few minutes after and were like, "What did he say to you? Did he issue any orders to you? What did he say? What did he want?" And I was like, "Oh, well, he said this and this and this. Oh, okay." And, and then there was some more training that I needed that he had said I should do. And so, of course, instantly, like that day, like I think within an hour, I was over in the staff training area getting, a whole program written up for me for my training so as to comply with this COB order, right, that he had just issued to me that I should get some more training for my job, right? The thing about Miscavige when I was in the Sea Org was when he was on base, when he was around in Los Angeles, everybody was freaked out. It was like heightened tension. And, we all, at the time I interpreted this as respect and, like what I didn't interpret it as was fear or terror. But that is exactly what it was. Everybody freaked out, wide eyes, "Oh my God, he's here," and you'd have everybody was kind of like on edge. And it was super important if COB was coming that everything be perfect, everything be super clean, right? We'd be up all night the night before if we knew he was coming, cleaning and everything, right? And everybody was on their tippy toes and freaked out that he'd come around and talk to you. But we didn't think of it as being freaked out. We just thought of it as, like, "Oh, wow, it's him." And we thought awe, and respect and admiration. But it wasn't really those things, because there was this fear element to it. And I didn't see that at the time. I look back on it, I see it very clearly. But at the time that I was in, it was this, we had this whole hero worship going of this guy because Miscavige is regarded in Scientology and especially by the Sea Org as this amazing, awesome, hardworking, nose to the grindstone guy. He pushes that image down. He wants people thinking that. And so there isn't any, disrespect or any idea at all that you would do anything other than exactly what he tells you to do if he comes around. So that's kind of the impression of him when I was in. And then, of course, looking back on it, I see that, we were just all scared out of our minds that, we were going to say or do something wrong and it was going to piss him off. And then we were going to get it sent to the RPF or something, right? Get sent to wash dishes or worse, because you hear stories and of his, you didn't really hear stories about his temper or about him hitting people. There was never anything like that. David Miscavige does not have a reputation for hitting people in the Sea Org. Nobody in the Sea Org thinks that that's what's going on unless they've worked with the guy up at the Int base. Then they know. But at the Int base, nobody can say anything to anybody outside the Int base. It's this closed-off world. And as far as, when people leave the Int base and they talk about what's going on up there, it's always, oh, it's so perfect. Oh, my God. It's the most ideal organization ever. It's just, it's like Scientology heaven there. That's what they all say because they know how much trouble they'd get into if they said anything else. So all of us lowly little peons at the lower levels of the Sea organization who never went to the Int base always had this idea that it was so amazing and wonderful when in fact it's a hellhole. So there you go. Justine S. What are your thoughts on ISIS and how come ISIS has a very hateful state of mind? What drives them to hate who they hate? I think of ISIS the same way that I kind of think of the 5,000 other destructive cults that are out there. They are a group of people who are under extreme religious fervor and undue influence by whoever the leaders of ISIS are. I can only talk in general terms because I haven't studied ISIS in detail or looked into how they operate or what they do specifically other than what I see in the news. And I know that that's not sufficient to really have an understanding of what ISIS is really all about. But I can say that in terms of these extremist, religious cults and this sort of thing, I don't think that for groups like that, it's really about the religion. I think that groups like that who carry out acts of extreme violence against unbelievers or their enemies have gone so far off the deep end that these are groups that attract people who are not in real good mental states to begin with, or people who want to carry out acts of extreme violence and are drawn to groups like that, like a magnet. I'm sure that that's a percentage of those groups. And there's also, John Atack and Steve Hassan have laid out in some detail, like on the Open Minds Foundation website, you can find stories about, or analyses done by John Atack of people who have been, wooed and convinced that, to join ISIS. And just like Scientology and other destructive cults, the process of getting people into these extremist groups and then convinced to carry out these acts of extreme violence, it's a very gradual process. Nobody joins these things and then the next day they got a gun in their hand and they're shooting people. There's a long process of convincing these members that they are unique and special and part of a group that sees things better and more truthfully than the rest of the world. And the rest of the world is, needs to wake up, needs to come around. And these guys are the ones who are going to bring the truth to the world, no matter, how much they don't want it. So it's really just sort of a similar, like all the things I've talked about with Scientology as to how people get suckered in and how people, how their mind changes through the process of being in these groups. It's all the same. It's just with a group like ISIS, it's a more extreme thing. They're pushing a more hardcore, violent agenda, and it's just as crazy, right? They're nuts, and that's a clinical term, right? They're nuts, but I mean they don't, there's no rationality to what they're doing. when it comes to killing unbelievers and things like that. They're just nuts. So that's kind of my all I can really say in very general terms. I wish I could talk more intelligently about it, but I just said I haven't gone into studying that group specifically, so I can only talk about them in the same terms I would any extremist religious group. Caynard Malk Jr. Hi Chris, I'm a big fan of your channel. I understand what happens when one spouse chooses to leave the Church of Scientology. Divorce, disconnection, horrible things. But my question is, what happens when both spouses want to divorce and both plan on staying in Scientology? Does the church get involved with marriage counseling? If there is money involved, like spousal child support, is that money taken away from the church? Money that could go to pay for going up the bridge to total insanity, oops, I mean freedom. Just wondering how the Church of Scientology handle that, or do they even care? Oh, sure. There is Scientology marriage counseling. It's a formal procedure that's done where both it's the only kind of auditing procedure done where an auditor goes in the room with both the wife and the husband at the same time. And they're both in the room, and individually one of them goes on the meter, holds the cans on the meter, and is asked, the marriage counseling basically consists of both of them in rotation being asked, what have you done to, like let's say the wife's name is Jane and the husband's on the meter. So it's going to be, what have you done to Jane? What have you withheld from Jane? What have you done to Jane? What have you withheld from Jane? Over and over and over again until the husband has, feels better or has a cognition of, oh, wow, yeah, I've been really horrible to her, wow, I feel so much better now, and the meter responds. And then he goes and sits there, and then Jane goes on the meter, and she's asked, let's say the husband's name is Bill, what have you done to Bill? What have you withheld from Bill? What have you done to Bill? What have you withheld from Bill? Over and over and over again. And since they're both in the room, they're both hearing all these, horrible and awful things that these guys have done to each other that they haven't necessarily told one another. And by doing this and basically getting off all their secrets and the hidden communications and jealousies and problems and various things, this is supposed to be a way of restoring love and understanding between the couple. And it pretty much works pretty well, actually. Not all the time. Not all the time by any stretch, okay? I mean, I've seen it salvage marriages and I've seen it not salvage marriages. I guess I'd say, actually I say it works really well, but actually maybe 50% of the time, right? I've seen it salvage marriages where the husband and wife honestly really got along better afterwards, stayed together, wanted to be together, whereas before that they wanted to get divorced. And then I saw other cases where they did it, didn't really get a lot out of it, said they did but really didn't, and ended up getting divorced anyway, right? The idea is whether you get divorced or not, it's supposed to restore communication and good feeling between the two. And generally speaking, I can say that it works in that direction, but no, not 100% of the time. And it costs money, of course, to get it. So that's something that Scientology will really push hard for if a couple is going to get divorced or saying that they're separated or on the rocks or having trouble. Get some marriage counseling. Maybe we can, maybe we can do something about that. Actually, they don't say maybe we can do something about it. They say, oh yeah, we'll fix it. And then after they've done that process, by the way, they're also, as a couple, supposed to do the communications course and a course called How to Salvage Your Marriage, right? Which goes over different Hubbard advices about, being married. And of course, Hubbard being married 3 times is chock-a-block full of good advice about being married. Anyway, yeah, I was being a little sarcastic there. Now, in terms of money, the church will always come down on the side of the person who's got more money. That's for sure. Unless the person who's got more money is just absolutely nuts. Or is going in an anti-Scientology direction. But generally speaking, your question says, well, all things being equal and them both wanting to continue in Scientology, if there's a side to be taken, the church will come down on the side of the person who, has got the bucks. Because, again, Scientology is all about money. And even when the staff members don't realize that that's what it's all about, they still naturally go in that direction because it's sort of a subconscious thing even, I mean, it's just so obviously money driven that the staff will tend to side with the person who's going to, well, they would probably think of it, will side with the person who's got more money because that person is going to have a more likely chance of paying for and going up the bridge, right? Whereas the poor guy or the person who doesn't have the money, yeah, not so much, right? But it's pretty arbitrary. If both things being equal between the husband and the wife, it's going to become down to personalities and things like that if there are sides that are going to be taken by the church against one or the other of the couple. Or no sides will be taken and they'll get a divorce and that'll be that, and then they'll both be treated like regular Scientologists. So it kind of depends on a case-by-case basis, I guess. So but what I said applies in general terms. So there you go. It's Flash Answers. Detective Inspector Monkfish. If I were to claim that I had been in the Sea Org in my previous life, would they let me sign a $999,999,990 year contract, subtracting 10 years for time already served? Oh yeah, you definitely get credit for time served. Mark McCartney. I love your videos. I also remember seeing you years ago in an anonymous video while they were protesting. I looked for and found that video, but it has now been taken down. Did you ask for it to be removed? And if not, can we see a photo of you in your Sea Org uniform from back in the day? Keep up the good work. Yeah, that video was taken in Seattle when I went up there for a recruitment tour or project. I was up there with another Sea Org member, and we arrived in the parking lot and looked up, and this was, I think, in 2008 or 2009. Yeah, it was in 2009. And there was an anonymous protest happening, and we just kind of looked at each other and we're like, okay, we're going to ignore them. And we just walked in, right? We just kind of smiled and walked in. And they filmed me, and I had no idea at all that this went up on the internet or that I was at all, featured as a Sea Org member in my uniform. So until 2013, when somebody found this video and put it on an interview that I did with Karen Delacarriere on her Surviving Scientology channel. Anyway, I do have a picture of me in my Sea Org uniform, and here it is. Okay, and that's actually the only picture I have of me from that time period with my uniform on like that, so enjoy. Preserve Big Cats. Is Gerald Armstrong personally responsible for revealing the OT3 tech and other private documents to the public, and have you met him? No, he's not personally responsible for OT3 being put into the court records. That was somebody else. But he is responsible for the Hubbard affirmations being put into the court record and some other things too, which I don't have this all straight in my head as to who was responsible for what exactly. But I definitely know for sure that Jerry's case took up those Hubbard affirmations. And we are all very thankful for that, because those affirmations are probably some of the most damning and revealing Hubbard writings ever. And so much so that I talk about them in my book and even put those affirmations in my book as an appendix. And yes, I have met Jerry. Hamish Downey. Whenever I watch these videos of former Scientologists, all of you seem so well-spoken and media savvy. I recently watched a video where Tory Magoo said that she felt that the communications course was actually a very good one. Do you agree? I guess this is a chicken and egg question, because maybe the type of people Scientology attracts are already quite well spoken, but I am curious as to whether you feel that some of the tech, as people call it, is actually useful. Yeah, I have talked about this before actually in some length, so check out my earlier Q&A videos about this. But yeah, there are parts of Scientology that are definitely useful, definitely workable, definitely do what they say they will do. Unfortunately, so much of Scientology is authoritarian, awful, totalitarian, mind control nonsense that it far outweighs the benefits or uses of Scientology. And as I've said before, there isn't anything in Scientology that you can't get perfectly, well without all that authoritarian nonsense outside of Scientology. And I don't just mean in the independent Scientologists, I mean in totally other subjects, right? There's lots of places where you can learn how to be a good communicator. There's a Toastmasters club, for example, where you can just practice being, doing public speaking. And that's the only reason why I'm a good public speaker, is because I had a lot of practice at it. Not because Scientology's communications course was so amazing that, it did change my life and it was a good course to do. But I could have gotten the same result without all the authoritarian bullshit through, Toastmasters or through other means. So that's why I say, yeah, sure, of course there's some good things in Scientology. There's probably good things in almost anything. But that doesn't mean you need to do it. So anyway, I hope that's clear. Okay, and so we've reached the end of our episode for this week, and I want to thank you very much for watching. I hope that you found these answers helpful, informative, and enlightening and entertaining. And as usual, of course, if you have any feedback of any kind, leave it in the comment section below. I love your guys' questions. I love your feedback. If you're thinking I'm getting it right or getting it wrong, just let me know. And of course, as I say, almost all the time, if you like what I do, consider throwing some love my way, because you guys are what keeps me being able to do this. And I thank you enormously for your support and just for watching. Thank you very much, and I'll see you guys next week.